conscious of my duties as Prime Minister to all parts of our United Kingdom and of the damage that union leaving without a deal could do when one part of it is without devolved government and unable, therefore, to prepare properly. The Council formally endorsed the legal instrument relating to the withdrawal agreement and the joint statement supplementing the political declaration. This should increase the confidence of the House that the backstop is unlikely ever to be used and would only be temporary if it is. But the Council also reiterated, once again, its long-standing position that there could be no reopening of the withdrawal agreement. So however the House decides to proceed this week, everyone should be absolutely clear that changing the withdrawal agreement is simply not an option. Turning to extending Article 50, this has always required the unanimous agreement of the other 27 member states. As I've made clear before, it was never guaranteed that the EU would agree to an extension or the terms on which we requested it, and they did not. Instead, the Council agreed that if the House approves the withdrawal agreement this week, our departure will be extended to 11 p.m. on the 22nd of May. This will allow time for Parliament to pass the withdrawal agreement bill, which is legally necessary for the deal to be ratified. But if the House does not approve the withdrawal agreement this week, our departure will instead be extended only to 11 p.m. on the 12th of April. At this point, we would either leave with no deal, or we would indicate a way forward before this date for consideration by the European Council. If this involved a further extension, it would certainly mean participation in the European parliamentary elections. The Council's conclusions were subsequently turned into a legal decision, with which the UK agreed and which came into force last Friday. So while the government has today laid a statutory instrument, which will be debated later this week, to reflect this in our domestic legislation, the date for our departure from the EU has now changed in international law. Were the House not to pass the statutory instrument, it would cause legal confusion and damaging uncertainty, but it would not have any effect on the date. But it would not have any effect on the date of our exit. Mr. Speaker, I continue to believe that the right path forward is for the United Kingdom to leave the EU as soon as possible with a deal, now on the 22nd of May. But it is with great regret that I have had to conclude that as things stand, there is still not sufficient support in the House to bring back the deal for a third meaningful vote. I continue to have discussions with colleagues across the House to build support so that we can bring the vote forward this week and guarantee Brexit. If we cannot, the government made a commitment that we would work across the House to find a majority on a way forward. The amendment in the name of my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, seeks to provide for this process by taking control of the order paper. I continue to believe doing so would be an unwelcome precedent to set, which would overturn the balance of our democratic institutions. So the government will oppose this amendment this evening, but in order to fulfil our commitments to this House, would seek to provide government time in order for this process to proceed. It would be for this House to put forward options for consideration and to determine the procedure by which they wish to do so. But I must confess that I am sceptical about such a process of indicative votes. When we've tried this kind of thing in the past, it's produced contradictory outcomes or no outcome at all. There is a further risk when it comes to Brexit, as the UK is only one half of the equation, and the votes could lead to an outcome that is unnegotiable with the EU. No government could give a blank cheque to commit to an outcome without knowing what it is. So I cannot commit the government to delivering the outcome of any votes held by this House, but I do commit to engaging constructively with this process. There are many different views on the way forward. But I want to explain the options as I understand them. The default outcome continues to be to leave with no deal. But this House has previously expressed its opposition to that path and may very well do so again this week. The alternative is to pursue a different form of Brexit or a second referendum. But the bottom line remains. If the House does not approve the withdrawal agreement this week and is not prepared to countenance leaving without a deal, we will have to seek a longer extension. This would entail the UK having to hold European elections, and it would mean that we will not have been able to guarantee Brexit. These are now choices the House will have the opportunity to express its view on. Mr. Speaker, this is the first chance I've had to address the House since my remarks last Wednesday evening.
Order. The House must calm itself. The Prime Minister is addressing the House and must be heard. Colleagues know from the record that they have a full opportunity to question the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister.
I expressed my frustration with our collective failure to take a decision, but I know that many members across this House are frustrated too, and we all have difficult jobs to do. People on all sides of the debate hold passionate views, and I respect those differences. I would also like to thank those colleagues, all of those colleagues that have supported the deal so far, and those that have taken the time to meet with me to discuss their concerns. I hope we can all agree we are now at the moment of decision, and in doing so we must confront the reality of the hard choices before us. Unless this House agrees to it, no deal will not happen. No Brexit must not happen, and a slow Brexit, which extends Article 50 beyond the 22nd of May, forces the British people to take part in European elections and gives up control of any of our borders, laws, money or trade, is not a Brexit that will bring the British people together. I know that the deal I've put forward is a compromise. It seeks to deliver on the referendum and retain trust in our democracy, while also respecting the concerns of those who voted to remain. But if this House can back it, we could be out of the European Union in less than 2 months. There will be no further extensions, no threat to Brexit, and no risk of a no deal. That, I believe, is the way to deliver the Brexit the British people voted for, and I commend this statement to the House.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of the statement and for the meetings that we've had in recent days. Mr. Speaker, the government's approach to Brexit has now become a national embarrassment. After 2 years of failure, broken promises after broken promises, the Prime Minister finally accepted the inevitable last week and voted to extend Article 50 and went to Brussels to negotiate. Last week's summit represented another negotiating failure for the Prime Minister. Her proposals were rejected and new terms were imposed on her. We now have an extension until mid-April or May the 22nd. And despite the clearly expressed will of this House, we will still face the prospect of a disastrous no-deal Brexit. This is even more remarkable given that the Minister for the Cabinet Office told this very chamber, and I quote, "Seeking such a short and critically one-off extension would be, in his words, downright reckless." Mr. Speaker, this failure has been compounded by the Prime Minister's attempts last week to pin the blame for this debacle on others. It was wholly inappropriate last Wednesday for the Prime Minister to try and pit the people against MPs. MPs elected here doing their duty to hold the government of the day to account. That is what Parliament exists for. And in a climate of heightened emotions where MPs on all sides have received threats and intimidation, I hope the Prime Minister will further reflect and think again about making what I believe to be such dangerous and irresponsible statements. Yes. Every step of the way along this process, the government has refused to reach out, refused to listen and refused to find a consensus that can represent the views of the whole country, not just the Conservative Party. Large parts of our country continue to be ignored by this government. No wonder so many people felt compelled to march on the streets or sign petitions over the weekend. Even the most ardent of Leavers, Mr. Speaker, the most ardent of Leavers think this government has failed. It's easy to understand the frustration at this chaos. It exists in this House, in Brussels and across the country. The government has no plan. For them, it's all about putting the Conservative Party before the country. Given that the Prime Minister admitted she does not have the numbers for her deal, will she accept today that her deal is dead and that the House should not have its time wasted giving the same answer for a third time. Yep. But the Prime Minister has succeeded in unifying two sides against her deal. The CBI and the TUC's unprecedented joint statement last week demanded a Plan B which protects jobs, workers, industry and communities. Has the Prime Minister got a Plan B? No. The government has failed and let the people down, whether they voted leave or whether they voted remain. The country cannot continue to afford a Tory crisis. It's time, Mr. Speaker, for Parliament to take control. And that's why, later today, we will be backing the amendment in the name of the Right Honourable Member for West Dorset. You made it clear last week, Mr. Speaker, that for the Prime Minister to bring a deal back, there must be significant changes. There are none. Rather than trying to engineer a way to bring back the same twice-rejected deal, will the Prime Minister instead allow, rather than fight plans for indicative votes? She cannot both accept her deal does not have the numbers and stand in the way of finding an alternative that may have the numbers. It is ridiculous to suggest that Parliament taking control is overturning democratic institutions. It's not, Mr. Speaker. It's Parliament doing its democratic job of holding government to account. So, Mr. Speaker, so will she agree to abide by the outcome of these indicative votes if they take place on Wednesday? On behalf of the Labour Party, we will continue with cross-party discussions to find a way forward, and I thank those members who have met with colleagues of mine and myself to have these discussions. I believe there is support in this House for a deal based on an alternative that protects jobs, the economy through a customs union and full single market access, and allows us to continue the benefit from participation in vital agencies and security measures. If the government refuses to accept this, we will support measures for a public vote to stop a no-deal or chaotic Tory deal. The government has had over 2 years to find a solution and has failed. It's time, Mr. Speaker, we put an end to this and move on from the chaos and failure and begin to clean up the mess. It's time for Parliament to work together and agree on a Plan B. If she's brave, the Prime Minister would help facilitate for this. If not, Parliament must send a clear message in the coming days. Mr. Speaker, I hope where the government has failed, this House can and will succeed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, the Right Honourable Gentleman indicates that we still face the he said we still face the prospect of no deal. The House has rejected no deal. As I said earlier, the House has rejected it. It's rejected, I think, twice now, and could very well continue to reject it. But the only way of actually putting that into practice is to support a deal. Now, he talks about reaching out. I have reached out to party leaders across this House and to other members of this House. My Right Honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, and my Right Honourable friend, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, have both held a number of meetings with members across this House and with party leaders. But the Right Honourable Gentleman ended by saying that it is now time for the House to decide. But the point is that up till now the House has not decided. The House has had... Yet again, honourable members on the opposition benches say they haven't had a chance. The House has had many chances to put amendments down. The House has voted twice on the Right Honourable Gentleman's plans for the future and rejected them. It has voted to reject no deal. It has also voted to reject a second referendum. He asked whether I was going to, whether the government would commit to abide by the indicative votes. I did, as the Right Honourable Gentleman accepted, give him advance notice of my statement. I then read the statement. It did clearly say I cannot commit the government to delivering the outcome of any votes held by this House. And honourable members, well, the Shadow Foreign Secretary shouts that's not good enough. If she just thinks about this, for a moment, just thinks about this. First of all, we don't know what the options are going to be that will be tabled. Secondly, we don't know what will be selected. But there's another point. I think it is important that no one would want to support an option which contradicted the manifesto on which they stood for election to this House. And the Chancellor of Duchy of Lancaster obviously will be, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster will be opening the debate this afternoon and will refer to the processes that are involved in the House. But the Right Honourable Gentleman said it was important that MPs were elected here to make decisions, yes, to take responsibility and to make decisions. But the MPs elected here to this House at this time have a duty to respect the result of the referendum that took place in 2016, and attempts to stop that result of that referendum being put into place, or attempts to change that result of that referendum, are not respecting the voters and not respecting our democracy. And then finally, the Right Honourable Gentleman mentioned the fact that a number of people had marched on the question of a second referendum. Indeed.
Order. The House is in a very agitated state, but it's at an early stage in the proceedings. Calm. The Prime Minister.
The Right Honourable Gentleman referred to the fact that a march for a second referendum took place. It is in fact the Right Honourable Gentleman's policy. I noticed that his deputy went on the march. I thought the Right Honourable Gentleman normally jumped at any opportunity to go on a march, but on this occasion he wasn't actually there. I can only assume on this occasion he was involved but not present.
Sir John Redwood.
Will the Prime Minister say to a Leave voter who wants us to leave on the 29th of March and thinks that indicative votes are a waste of time because, as she rightly says, the options on offer have already been rejected once or twice in this Parliament?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right that the options that appear to be in offer have already been rejected by this Parliament. I would have to point out, of course, that for reasons that I explained in my statement in relation particularly to the governance of part of the United Kingdom, we have requested the extension to Article 50, so that 29th of March date is no longer there. But I would say to a Leave voter, we can guarantee Brexit. We can guarantee Brexit and leaving on the 22nd of May by supporting, as the Council conclusion suggests, by supporting the deal that has been put forward. That is the way to guarantee Brexit. Anything else does not guarantee Brexit.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of her statement. Mr. Speaker, we are in a crisis, but one of the Prime Minister's own making. Her ill-judged speech before she departed for Brussels concluded that everyone's to blame but herself, trying to put herself on the side of the people and blaming parliamentarians. Mr. Speaker, it was Trump-esque. We don't need such raw populism at a time like this. It is truly flabbergasting. Will she now apologise for blaming parliamentarians the way that she did today? The Prime Minister needs to be reminded she's supposed to be leading a country. None on these benches think she can deliver. Her backbenchers don't think she can deliver. People right across the United Kingdom don't think she can deliver. Prime Minister, time is up. Mr. Speaker, today is about parliamentarians taking back control. People at home are watching and they are ashamed of this Parliament, ashamed of this government, ashamed of the embarrassment that British politics has become. Parliament today must move to find a consensus. We must come together and protect the interests of citizens across Scotland and all other parts of the United Kingdom. Members, we still have a choice. And Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Prime Minister, now with all sincerity, will she respect the will of Parliament and reject no deal? You know, when the Prime Minister is telling us that our votes don't count, at the same time Privy Councillors are being given briefings by her government, and those briefings are talking about the catastrophe and the real risks that there are to the United Kingdom, and it's the Prime Minister that is threatening the people of the United Kingdom with a no deal, and a no deal that this Parliament has already rejected. Mr. Speaker, what is the point of all of us sitting in this chamber and voting on debates And the Prime Minister thinks she can ignore parliamentary sovereignty. What a disgrace. What an insult to this place. Because if our votes don't count, then frankly, we may as well just go home. If this House... Well, I'll tell you something, Mr. Speaker. If this Prime Minister is telling the people of Scotland that our votes don't count when we voted to remain, well, we know what the answer is. And the day is coming that the people of Scotland will vote for independence and we will be an independent country in the European Union. So, will the Prime Minister tell us, do our votes count? Are they binding on the government, or is this just a puppet show? If that is the case, this is the greatest assault on democracy inflicted by any Prime Minister, and if members of Parliament are prepared to tolerate that, then shame on them. Shame on them. Mr. Speaker, Scotland will not be dragged out of the European Union by this Prime Minister. From the very beginning of this process, Scotland has been ignored, and now we learn that Parliament will once again be ignored. Mr. Speaker, at the weekend I was proud and privileged to take part in the historic march in London. I was proud to stand with the people alongside Scotland's First Minister and demand that the government listen to the people. And let me tell the Prime Minister this, she said that no deal is the alternative. Well, we on these benches will move revoke, because the Scottish parliamentarians have made sure that we have that power, and we will stop the Prime Minister driving us off a cliff edge. Over 1 million people marched to have the chance to vote again, to stop this chaos. Prime Minister, why are you not listening? Mr. Speaker, the PM must end this madness. Put it to the people. Let's have a people's vote.
I say to the right honourable gentleman, he was putting forward a number of proposals for the way forward in the speech that he has just given in response to my statement. There was one point at which he talked about Scotland voting to be an independent, would vote to become an independent country in the European Union. Of course, what was perfectly clear in the independence referendum in 2014, where Scotland rejected independence and decided to stay. Oh, the right honourable gentleman says, give it a rest. He stands up here proclaiming the benefits of democracy, and yet tells me to give it a rest when I point out that the people of Scotland voted to remain part of the United Kingdom. And he talks about coming together. This House has a duty to deliver Brexit. That means, I believe, delivering a Brexit with a deal that enables that smooth and orderly exit. And when he asks the question about whether his vote counts and votes in this House count, then of course votes in this House count. But so do the votes of 17.4 million people who voted to leave the European Union.
Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The statutory instrument for extension of time was laid 1 hour ago. There is grave concern that there was no lawful UK authority for the decision on March the 22nd to extend the exit date. Did the Prime Minister seek the Attorney General's advice beforehand, as clearly required by both the Ministerial Code and the Cabinet Manual, and will she publish that advice? And why did she not invoke the commencement order for Section 1 of the Withdrawal Act, repealing the European Communities Act 1972?
The right honourable gentleman talks about the decision to extend Article 50. This House had supported an extension of Article 50. Yes, the Council took a different decision in relation to the length of time that extension could take place for, but it was clear from this House, and people are saying to me, listen to this House and respect the House. The House was clear that an extension of Article 50 should be sought, and an extension was agreed.
Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has told the House that if her withdrawal agreement is not approved by this Friday, then the extension we have been granted will only last until the 12th of April. If the Prime Minister currently does not intend to bring her deal back for another vote, she will then be faced with only two choices. Either doing nothing, in which case we will leave with no deal on the 12th of April, or applying for a further extension. Given the crisis that is facing our country, the public have a right to know which of those two options the Prime Minister intends to choose. Prime Minister, could you please tell us?
The right honourable gentleman is right that I said that as things stand, I did not believe there was support for bringing back a meaningful vote, but I also indicated that I was continuing to talk to colleagues across this House, and I would hope to be able to bring back a vote in this House that enables us to guarantee Brexit, because the one way of guaranteeing Brexit is to abide by the decision that was taken last week and ensure that we leave on the 22nd of May.
Mrs. Theresa May.
Prime Minister welcomed the comments of the Taoiseach over the weekend that he believes that there are special arrangements that could be put in place to maintain an invisible border on the island of Ireland, even in the event that the UK leaves without a deal.
We have, as my right honourable friend knows, and she's been involved in some of these discussions, been looking at the alternative arrangements that could be put in place, and further work is required. But I would also draw my right honourable friend's attention to, I believe, a release by the European Commission today in which they make clear that in all circumstances all EU laws would have to be abided by.
Mr. Vincent Cable.
Those of us who were among the million on Saturday naturally regret that both she and the Leader of the Opposition were too busy to join us. But can I ask, does she agree with the observation of her Chancellor that such a referendum would be a perfectly coherent proposition?
Well, gentlemen, I think virtually every time he stands up in either a statement or a speech, a debate where I'm opening a debate here in this House on this subject, tends to ask me about a second referendum. My view about a second referendum is very simple. I wasn't not on the march because I was too busy, as he says, but of course he and I hold a different opinion about a second referendum. I believe that it's important for this House, rather than talking about and wanting to pass the decision back to the British people again, to actually say to the British people, we will abide by the instruction that you gave us in the referendum in 2016.
Sir Patrick McLaughlin.
The cost to the British people of the amount of money which will be payable under the deal that the Prime Minister has put forward is between £34 and £39 billion. What does the government estimate the cost to the United Kingdom of no deal?
Well, my right honourable friend asks an important question. We have published economic analysis which shows the impact of no deal. Of course, as a government, we have put over £4 billion is being spent in preparations for leaving the European Union with or without a deal. But as I say, there is economic analysis which shows the impact of no deal over the coming months. My own view is that over time we would be able to address the issues that arose, but there would be an immediate impact to the economy.
Vic Cooper.
The Prime Minister said that she is prepared to provide for indicative votes and also to engage constructively with the process. But she has also, and appeared to again be, many times ruled out supporting a customs union. So can I ask her, if a customs union is supported as part of some indicative votes, is she ruling out the government attempting to negotiate a customs union with the European Union?
The Right Honourable Lady has asked me on a number of occasions about a customs union. I've made my view on a customs union very clear. That, and I think those, there are a number of proposals that have been suggested over time in this House for alternative ways forward in relation to a deal. But there are a number of questions that members need to ask themselves in relation to those issues. So in talking about a customs union, what are the rules that the Right Honourable Lady would see actually being abided by? Would they involve abiding by state aid rules? In some of the proposals that have been put forward, there's a real question about free movement, and would free movement continue to be abided by? My own view is, having stood, I stood on a manifesto which made a reference to a customs union. I stood on a manifesto which made a reference to a customs union because I and the party opposite both believed we should be able to have an independent trade policy. It continues to be my view that we should have an independent trade policy in the future.
Mr. M. Patterson.
Mr. Speaker, the European Commission today said that all preparations for no deal had been completed. And last week in the statement, the Parliamentary Under-Secretary for DEXU made clear that very good progress was being made on the UK front in preparation for no deal. So it's a bit surprising, Mr. Speaker, to hear from the Prime Minister that Northern Ireland is unable to prepare properly because it hasn't got devolved government. Which areas of government activity present a problem, and when will they be resolved?
I say to my right honourable friend, it is the Northern Ireland Civil Service do not have the powers to take the necessary decisions that would be needed in a circumstance in which there was a no deal and the UK left the European Union with a no deal. Now, it is possible to address those issues, but that had not been done by the 29th of March. The question about the impact on Northern Ireland and where there was no devolved government was an important one. And I believe that it's absolutely right that the government took the view that it was not appropriate to allow that no deal to go ahead at a time when the powers were not in place to ensure proper exercise of the decision-making necessary in a no deal situation.
Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Speaker, but just on that last point, the Prime Minister has known for some considerable time, and so has the House, that the 29th of March was the target date. So why hasn't appropriate preparations been made? Why do we need another 2 weeks? What's going to happen in another 2 weeks that couldn't have happened up to now? I mean, this is a fundamental lack of preparation, and the government's entirely responsible for that, if that's the case, because this is a new argument. I have to say, Mr. Speaker, this is an entirely new argument that we're hearing for the first time as to why we need extension. But could I ask the Prime Minister, further to the question that the former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland raised, someone with great experience, having served, I think, 4 years in Northern Ireland, who raises the point that Leo Varadkar has made it clear that in terms of a no deal, that he is very confident there will be no border checks. Michel Barnier has said the same. Angela Merkel has said the same. She shakes her head, but that's what he said. That's what he said. So the reality is, Mr. Speaker, that this backstop problem, which has been elevated, one has to ask, and I'd like the Prime Minister's views on this, why is it that the EU insists on this when, in the case of a no deal, it doesn't need to have any checks? And why is it that the Prime Minister ever agreed to this backstop in the first place, which is the thing that bedevils her agreement?
Can I say first of all to the right honourable gentleman that actually the issue of the positioning governments of Northern Ireland in a no-deal situation, it's not the first time that it's been raised today. It was raised by my right honourable friend, the DEFRA Secretary, in the debate on no deal, which took place nearly 2 weeks ago. In relation to the question of the border checks in Northern Ireland, I would simply say to the right honourable gentleman, a number of statements are made and have been made from individuals about the situation in relation to the border in Northern Ireland. What is also clear that actually when you look at the detail of what the European Union has said, they have not said, they've made clear that European Union law would need to be adhered to in any circumstance in which there was no deal. We ourselves have said, and the right honourable gentleman is aware of this, that we would ensure that we were moving towards a period of time for a temporary period, because of the legal situation it could only be for a temporary period, of having minimal checks with exceptions. But the legal position is a different one in relation to the necessity to be able to have certain checks taking place. And the European Union has been clear that EU law would need to be applied in all of these circumstances.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To carry on with that point that has just been raised, is the Prime Minister suggesting that in order for Northern Ireland to be ready to leave with no deal, there would need to be some form of direct decision-making by us in this House in the absence of a Stormont government?
Yes, my honourable friend is absolutely right. If there is no Stormont government, if powers are needed and ministerial direction is needed, which is not available to the civil servants currently, it would require some form of direct application of powers here from this Westminster.
Angela Eagle.
Speaker, the Prime Minister appears to have ruled out bringing back her deal for an indefinite amount of time, and yet we only have 2 weeks before we crash out without a deal. She said that she won't necessarily take notice of this House's indicative votes process. And she's also said that she will not continue as Prime Minister if we remain in the EU beyond June the 30th. This seems to be pointing directly to a prime ministerial dash for no deal. Will she actually say that that is not what she wants, and tell us when she's going to abandon her deal rather than just keep postponing the vote on it?
I have always been clear that I want us to leave the European Union. My preference is for us to leave the European Union with a deal. But I have always also been clear, and it is a very simple, logical fact, that it isn't possible simply to say from honourable members that they don't want no deal. If they're going to leave the European Union, then we have to have a deal if we're not going to leave without a deal.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Given that the deal that is on offer now is exactly the same as the deal that was on offer a week ago, why does the Prime Minister think that you, Mr. Speaker, would allow it to be voted upon in this session?
Can I say to my honourable friend that I'm very clear of the strictures that the Speaker gave when he made his statement last week, and that were we to bring forward a further motion to this House, we would of course ensure that that further motion met with the requirements that the Speaker had made.
Joanna Cherry.
Mr. Speaker, sometimes it's hard to believe what one hears in this House these days, but we have it written down in black and white here that the Prime Minister said this afternoon that she cannot commit to delivering the outcome of any votes held by this House. Does she realise that this makes a mockery of parliamentary democracy? And will she reconsider and commit to holding a binding vote to avoid a no-deal Brexit?
To the honourable lady, that it's a very simple position. An indicative vote is exactly that, an indicative vote. I'm sure members of this House cannot expect the government simply to give a blank cheque to any vote that was that came through. For example, the SNP position is that they would like to see this House voting to revoke Article 50. This government's position is that we should deliver on the referendum result that took place in 2016 and deliver Brexit.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, you have told us in the dispatch box on 108 separate occasions that we would leave the European Union on the 29th of March. You have told the House it's now the 12th of April. But you have not changed your mind about ruling out a second referendum, unlike your Chancellor, who on Ridge yesterday effectively opened the door to it. Have you said anything to the Chancellor about this? Or has collective responsibility on your watch completely collapsed?
I think the Chancellor of the Exchequer made the point that this was one of the propositions. It is indeed one of the propositions that has been put forward. It's been referenced in questions already. It's been referenced by members across this House, but I assure my honourable friend that I have not changed my view about it. As I indicated earlier, I believe we should deliver on the result of the first referendum.
Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister speaks of the frustration felt by MPs. Does the Prime Minister accept that that frustration is born out of her intransigence, which is the greatest barrier to getting a deal? Following up from the question from my right honourable friend, the member for Leeds Central, if you don't get a deal through Parliament by this Friday, then in 18 days' time, by the 12th of April, we will have to decide whether we want a longer extension or whether we want to crash out without a deal. Given that Parliament has voted twice already not to leave without a deal, will you confirm that by the 12th of April you will seek that longer extension and abide by the wishes of this Parliament?
To the honourable lady, that she's absolutely right in the results of the council meeting that took place last week. If we can guarantee Brexit and leave on the 22nd of May by agreeing a deal this week, If we fail to do that, then we will have to look, we've been clear about the commitment to facilitate seeing whether there is a majority across this House for anything. But the government cannot be expected simply to say that anything that comes through the government will accept. We all stood on manifestos. We all have positions in relation to our duty to deliver on the referendum. And I think that's important, and we should keep that in our minds.
Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has accepted that the House is going to have so-called indicative votes to try to find if there's a majority for a way forward. But she has twice now, I think, declined to commit the government to giving effect to a majority in this House, citing the fact that she stood on a manifesto which she thinks should guide things. May I remind her that that manifesto only appeared halfway through the election campaign. I don't think it was discussed in Cabinet. It was not circulated to the candidates who were already fighting their campaigns, and nothing in that manifesto in Europe played any part in the general election campaign. We're all being asked to show pragmatism, flexibility and put the national interest first. Can I ask her to be prepared to bend from her commitment to the manifesto, apart from the one proposal that she dropped fairly promptly when the manifesto first appeared?
To my right honourable and learned friend, first of all, I don't accept the entire description that he set out there. But can I just say to my right honourable friend, I think we have looked in the whole process of negotiation. There has been compromise, but I don't think my right honourable and learned friend was a respected and long-standing member of previous governments. And I suspect that if my right honourable and learned friend had been standing at this dispatch box prior to the possibility of indicative votes, and we have to see the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster will make a reference, obviously, to the government's position when he speaks, and further explanation when he speaks later this afternoon. But if my right honourable friend, our right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset's amendment passes, then of course there will be those indicative votes. But if my right honourable and learned friend was standing here as a government minister, I don't think he would give a blank cheque. I think he is indicating his assent with what I'm suggesting.
Kate Hoey.
The Prime Minister has said once again that the European Union are not going to, under any circumstances, look again at the withdrawal agreement. So I actually agree with her that indicative votes are a nonsense, because actually in the end they are talking about the future relationship and not about the withdrawal agreement. But can I say to her now, why will she not start preparing properly for, and I don't call it a no deal, it's not a no deal, it's a different type of deal that would take us out from, it's a WTO deal. Why will she not continue to prepare for that and to make sure that in the end, what really matters is the people's vote, not what this Parliament says?
Say to the right honourable lady that I hope I've expressed my belief that we should be delivering on the result of the 2016 referendum. Can I also say to the right honourable lady, we continue to prepare for no deal. Those preparations are being continued.
Mr. Stephen Crabb.
I've heard many colleagues on the other side of the House say that they oppose the deal, not because they don't support the terms of the withdrawal agreement. In fact, many of them go to pains to say they do support the terms of the withdrawal agreement, but because they have problems with the political declaration. Has the Prime Minister considered providing this House with an opportunity to have votes on the terms of the withdrawal agreement and then on the political declaration to enable us to come to a view about whether the terms of our departure are acceptable to a majority of the House?
Say to my right honourable friend that, of course, throughout the debate that we've had previously, one of the concerns that many people across the House have raised was about the political declaration and the fact that it wasn't legal text, and a concern to, if you like, tie it down further, which is what we did do in our discussion with the European Union. But I'm sure my right honourable friend has also seen the terms of the terms of the Council conclusions, but we've always worked to ensure that the political declaration could be firmed up, if one likes, to describe it as such, to give greater confidence in that sort of future relationship.
Very good indeed to see the honourable gentleman member for Wolverhampton South East back in his place and manifestly in rude health. Mr. Pat McFadden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Pitching Parliament against the people undermines parliamentary democracy and feeds the far right. Does the Prime Minister regret her use of words last Wednesday?
First of all, can I echo the Speaker's comments to say how good it is to see the right honourable gentleman back in his place. I was trying to make a very simple point last week, which is that this is a moment of decision for Parliament. We gave the people the choice. The people gave their decision. Parliament needs to deliver on that decision, and the time has come for Parliament to decide.
Sarah Newton.
I very much agree with my right honourable friend. This is the moment for Parliament to decide. And while I would very happily vote for the withdrawal agreement and the future declaration for a third time, other colleagues won't. So could my right honourable friend give us a bit more information about how the government is going to enable the House to come to a solution for a plan B so she can go back to the EU and make sure that we deliver on what all of us said we would do in this House, well, the main political parties said that they would do, and that is deliver Brexit with a deal.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for her question, and the opportunity will come for the Chancellor of Duchy of Lancaster in the debate that follows this statement to set out in a little more detail how the government sees the processes going forward over the next few days. It is, of course, the case that the European Union Council has made clear that the withdrawal agreement does remain closed and will not be reopened. And it's against that background, of course, that Parliament would look at any options that it brought forward.
Anna